Hello, I'd like to welcome you to the Traveling Investor. Today's topic of discussion, the U.S. Airlines. Talked about this a little bit, covered a little bit last week. Obviously been a pretty bad month for the airlines, in particular with relationship to the precipitous drop in demand brought on by the COVID-19 coronavirus event. So the airlines, they have had an up and down couple of weeks. This past week was largely a good week for the airline community and for any shareholders in those airlines, as the stimulus package passed by Congress gives some pretty nice financial guarantees, gives a grants to the tune of $25 billion for the major passenger airlines, with the potential for another $25 billion in loans afterwards. Today is currently March 30th. It's Monday. The broad stock market was up today with some optimism with regards to the potential for some sort of a treatment to be coming out for the COVID-19 coronavirus. Nothing definite yet. President Trump, of course, had mentioned a couple of drugs. There's some other drugs that are being tested as well, not to mention vaccines that are being worked on. There is some hope that there will be at least some treatment ability to help to take the pressure off of the negative impact of coronavirus going forward. We should know more in a few weeks. Combined with that, there still is some pretty good indication. There is an MIT study recently that indicates that coronavirus, once you get above about 70 degrees Fahrenheit, sort of drops off the cliff as far as transmission. That doesn't mean that everything's going to end as the summer arrives in the northern hemisphere, but there is hope at least that it will help to stymie the exponential curve that we're seeing, where we're doubling every 3 days, every 4 days in many locations, the number of cases of coronavirus and the fatalities that are occurring as well. So the question now is, what happened to the airlines? Some of the airlines were down double-digit percentage during today's session. All of the airlines were down at least a little bit. Undoubtedly, this is going to be a recession that's going to take a little time to get out of. The economic shock is just too severe in terms of closing down the economy for a 6 to 8 week period, which is pretty much what we're looking at. They have the stimulus package, a devoted portion of the stimulus package, not inconsequential, $50 billion total between grants and loans. They have the potential for a relatively quick increase in demand, certainly not an increase in demand that'll bring it back to what it was last year or what we are anticipating it to be this year, but an increase in demand that potentially could get you within 80-90% of what it was in 2019, which at this point in time would be considered a pretty good victory for the airline business. What should also be pretty good returns for shareholders as some of these airline stocks come up off of distress levels and back into more of a business as usual. There's no question that demand growth is going to increase, that we're going to return. People are going to want to start flying again. There isn't, of course, the fear of flying right now. There's a fear of COVID-19. I don't know how much of a difference it makes, because traveling is somewhat relatable to COVID-19, but pretty much everyone's living under lock and key right now at stay-at-home orders. So traveling when you're able to travel may not seem like that great of a risk comparatively. As it relates to the downturn in the airline stock today, there's some uncertainty, I think, with regards to what the final disposition of these grants are going to be. There's a couple of things that are mentioned in the legislative language that there's not a lot of details on. The airlines now are discussing plans to sort of group together where they can maintain service to certain locations without each individual airline having to maintain that service. So they would all sell tickets, but potentially only one of the airlines would operate a flight, or else they would cycle operating flights every so many days. And the idea there being that until demand returns, it's kind of foolish for 3 different airlines to be operating flights in the teens in terms of load factor when you could bundle them up together not lose as much money, and just sort of all the seats that you sold go into one particular aircraft that'll handle that flight. And this is one of the things that was listed in the stimulus package, that they didn't want cities to lose service as a result of this downturn, that in order to take the grant funds, airlines had to agree to maintain at least one flight a day service into all the places that they currently have service. So there's this idea in locations where multiple airlines maintain service that they can consolidate some of that, at least for a period of time, until it bounces back. It'll be interesting to see what the government does with that. You have to think that it's sort of reasonable. And the other side of the grant money is that, you're not going to furlough any employees. They have a lot of airplanes parked. If employees haven't been furloughed, they can ramp up very quickly. If they start suddenly selling a lot of seats, then they'll all be competing for that particular location wherever it is again. The airlines will be going head to head. So you would think that they can get that deal done with the government. The other side is an equity stake, that the government is sort of definitively stated that tied to these grants will be some sort of equity stake that the government will have, so that at a later date they can depart that position and the taxpayer won't necessarily have to cover the $25 billion tab, that they can essentially sell their stake back to the airlines or into the broad market at a certain point in the future and regain some of the proceeds that the taxpayer has gifted or will have gifted at this point to the airlines. So without that knowledge in place, there's, I think, a little bit of concern that this may take a little bit of time to organize, that nothing really goes quickly in Washington, D.C., and that these airlines come in and attempt to, with something that's not really well spelled out, they're in a negotiating state. So they're going to have to go in and negotiate with these government entities in order to determine what the exact setup is going to be as it relates to some of these items. So you see the airlines that don't have as strong of a balance sheet are getting hit, once again, sort of getting pushed back towards distressed territory, in that a few of these airlines all these airlines, they only have a few months before they run out of cash. So they all need to get injections of cash before too long, but there's some that are a little bit more at risk than others. And of course, the government at a certain point, they're not going to let several airlines go bankrupt. Maybe one or two they would allow if we can't come to an agreement on this particular topic. But that's probably what was going on today. Probably not anything more insidious as far as the potential, the thinking of a longer term sort of down push as it relates to coronavirus. Largely, there's just uncertainty that's been injected again. There was a lot of positiveness late last week when this deal went through, the stimulus deal. The airlines are going to get their money, and now there's just sort of this realization or recognition that although they've approved these funds, they haven't really specified the details, and so there's going to be some negotiating going on, perhaps last a little bit longer. And once again, we'd like to thank you. Hopefully you're doing well wherever you are. You're keeping your hands clean and keeping your social distance, and soon, hopefully, we'll be through the end of this, and we'll be talking about better days. For those of you who are investors, be bold. It pays sometimes to be greedy when everyone else is fearful, but be conscientious of the fact that there is a potential that this may go on a little bit longer. The hope is that it won't. There are some positive signs that we may be seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, but keep your wits about you. See you next time.